I always figure, I gotta take 2,000 pictures, and then if I get 5 good ones, I'm okay. The text is all about Verona Freylein and her existence here. So it sort of will just talk a little bit about the history, and so these are samples of images that could have come from her photographs and her diary and stuff like that. I want it to be very apparent that that when you come around and look at the back, and it looks kind of messy, and you figure, well, that's kind of almost cheating, I mean, he's got all this garbage here, and yet when you go around the other side, when you look at through the window again, it all coalesces into this kind of bit of magic. Where she lived in northern Italy, there was actually some volcanoes there that had these vents that from a local convent, there were a few nuns that actually were using these volcanic vents to shoot capsules into space. So she was really interested in exploring the volcanoes in BC. Now, I have to be really careful going through here that I don't touch anything, any of the landscape, because it's actually, despite the fact that it looks quite messy and haphazard, it's actually really, really carefully set up. Because there's certain things, if I move them even more than a millimeter, well, yeah, some even a millimeter, it throws it out of whack. She thought she could just take day trips to the volcanoes and explore them. As it turns out, they weren't really there. And because of her cracked foot condition, she couldn't travel very much, so she actually mentally started traveling to these places. And there was something about the canoe itself was a perfect form for being conducive to creating these dreams. It was more she worked theoretically on the notion of flight. They didn't actually do any test flights here in the Kelowna area. This is one of the volcanic vents.
Okay.
And in her dream, she keeps flying into these vents and then popping out into space. And then in space, she flies around that. It's actually the planet you see in that photo. She flies around, and then she flies over it and goes in one of the cracks and then into this thing, and then she pops out the tunnel over Kelowna. Her favorite place was actually lying in the orchard under these sort of enormous dead trees. And the trees are so old that, the European settlers couldn't have planted them. In fact, her friend who made the canoe, who you realize reading through it is an old First Nations canoe builder, he doesn't even remember when they were built, and his grandparents don't even remember. There's a garage there and a little cabin and stuff like that. But these huge trees that are way bigger than normal apple trees and cherry trees and stuff like that. So that's one of the landscapes there, and you even see her chair that she would sometimes sit out there and read and stuff like that. Except that, the architecture is not actually 18th century. So I want it to feel like it's contemporary but very old. There's these looseness in time, like sometimes it's now. And then the other window, you're looking through her old house. But the house has been converted into a cafe from the wine tours. And so I want the viewer to look in there and think, well, that looks like now, but when you look out over the landscape, you see the old canoe there. There's something about it's not a personal memory, but it's based on a different personal memory, and that's once when I was tree planting, getting lost in a helicopter and flying around and seeing all these landscapes. Because of the proximity to the mountains, everything looked like perfect miniatures, and we spent an hour, and I was in this state where everything, it felt like I was flying through miniatures, except with really kind of a heightened depth perception and things like that. So afterwards, not being a kid anymore, but going through the Okanagan, just the very forms of the mountains here, I began to look at them as miniatures and really trying to reproduce what those forms look like. And that's part of what the fun of this is doing, is kind of seeing these landscapes and trying to create that little bit of transformation. As I mentioned earlier talking to you, every time I go through here, I think about flying through. What would it look like to fly through the Okanagan? But I don't mean it in a jet. I mean like if you could have a flying canoe, and just what would it feel like zipping around over top of it, and things like that. So all of these stories, it's kind of looking, I play a little bit loose with history and fact and fiction and stuff like that, but also I like to do that with landscape. This is different than any other show I've ever done. Like I've made miniatures before, like the landscape you see looking through the windows, I've made one similar to that, but I've never really connected them in this way with another installation. And with all, I've had text in other ones, but having this video installation and the play with scale is something I've never really done before. And I'm not too concerned if people know it's one piece or not, but I'd like them to kind of understand the connections between them. Taking an entire space and making just one installation, I think, is a really interesting experience for me.
He's just finishing up some documenting.
I think I got enough.